Hello everyone. Previously I put out a video about Gods Will Be Watching, and I know from the 20-something people that saw it that it was widely disseminated and highly acclaimed. It was also, however, pretty poor by my standards, and I don't think I explained everything I wanted to as satisfactorily as should have been. With this in mind, this video is going to be a short-ish discussion of the good aspects of Gods Will Be Watching specifically. From a gameplay perspective, it's still pretty raw, and I can't deny that. But at the same time, there are some aspects of this game that really do need to be discussed because of just how well they're presented, and just what they mean within the context of the game as a whole. It also needs to be said that I'm making this video because I do like this game, and for all of its failings, I did enjoy my time with it quite a bit. I figured I'd release this video given that the game's received an update in the form of the Mercy patch, which adds a new suite of difficulty settings to the game as well as removing some of the random elements depending on what difficulty you're playing. I'm going to present this discussion with respect to the standard difficulties of the game, which are original and easy mode. On that note, let's get started. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy what you hear. The first thing I'm going to talk about is this game's morality system. I know that I stated that the narrative invalidates any moral choices present in the game, but I still think there's some worth to discussing those aspects of Gods Will Be Watching. The morality system in the game is unique because it subverts most of the tropes associated with contemporary morality systems. There are no implied good or bad choices, just the best choices in a set of circumstances. There are no moral or immoral choices, only choices in and of themselves. It's by doing this that choices stop becoming predetermined good or bad and become expressions of pragmatic decision-making within a focused context. This is why I'm disregarding the narrative, because doing so narrows the context of every decision down to the scenario in which it occurs. This means that you can just focus on each vignette as opposed to the work as a whole, and I think this is valid given the looseness of the narrative and the plot overall. First example we have of the game's take on morality is Marvin. Marvin is the team's dog, a Rottweiler who appears in chapters 3 and 4. It's in these chapters that his worth as a team member becomes apparent. He's there to be a red shirt. He has the least usefulness as a team member in either of his contexts and consumes resources and time regardless. The player can use him to test drugs without risking team members, or to kill him and eat him for spare food if you run out or you're facing an emergency. There's no reason not to do any of this. He's a liability to the team and serves no useful or unique purpose in either case, and according to the post-game statistics, it's clear how people approach the problem. Very few people chose to inject Marvin with antidotes, only 10% compared to the 45 that chose to inject Donald. He's sacrificed 60% of the time in Chapter 3, indicating that he's used to test more lethal medications on a whole, and in Chapter 4 he sacrificed 20% of the time, which is on par with the other human characters. His use in all of these contexts is representative of how people completed the chapter. As far as I know, statistics are logged when a player successfully completes a chapter, so we can see that Marvin is used quite a bit to get through efficiently rather than sentimentally. Consider his use as a source of food in Chapter 4. He's killed off almost as much as the other human characters, while at the same time being the least useful and having no unique abilities associated with him. I'm guessing he's either being killed for food in an emergency or killed to save resources early on. These are all representations of pragmatic decision-making, not sentimental decision-making. There are no button prompts or demon horns shepherding the player either way. The game just puts the tools in the hands of the player and has them make the most of the situation as they are, be that good or bad. The best example of this is the use of Edward in Chapter 6. Edward is the child in the age-old question, would you kill a child to save 1,000? Except it's not 1,000 in this case, it's 4 billion. The game presents this style of choice perfectly. 4 billion nameless, faceless souls weighed against a child whose parents are in the same room. The kid is even so innocent that he plays on his handheld even as you fire wildly into the air. The kid is the single most important bargaining piece in the room, and it's even possible to kill him if you want to crush the morale of your hostages. I'm going to demonstrate this now. The thing is, it's also entirely possible to pass the chapter without using him. There's even an achievement attached to this, and it's one of the least commonly acquired ones given his effectiveness as a bargaining piece. In fact, the attachment of this achievement to Edward probably undermines the point of having him there by making the player consciously avoid using him during hostage negotiations. Removing the achievement would put the player more comfortably in Burden's shoes and more accurately reflect the player's sense of morality and thinking at the time. The question still remains though, would you kill a child in the process of saving 4 billion? Would you do the pragmatic thing and either hold him hostage or shoot him dead to get information out of his parents? Is one tangible, concrete life worth more than the abstraction of 4 billion lives represented as a number on the screen? Who's worth sacrificing here? The game isn't going to give you any of these answers because you have to find them in your approach to the chapter and its challenges. You make your own decisions as a result of applying your own ideas and beliefs to the problem at hand, and of course, having those beliefs tested as the problem evolves. Moral decisions aren't bottlenecks that halt progression and force you to be the good guy or the bad guy, but decision-making processes that run in parallel. An ostensibly good or bad playthrough is good or bad because the bulk of your decisions are evaluated as good or bad against your own moral understanding of the world and its workings. Any consequences you experience in the game are expressed mechanically rather than emotionally. If you kill the child, nobody makes a speech and there's no cute cutscene. The game takes a topic as cruel and as personal as the murder of a child and plays it entirely straight-faced. The only reactions are systemic and presented absolutely. In this way, the game places the issue of morality squarely in the player's hands and makes morality a function of pragmatism. Will you do what's right by you, or right by the mission? What's it going to be? You might not have the answers to these questions at the outset, but you're going to find them out eventually, and once you present your answers, you are going to have them tested. The game does make this easier for you in one instance. In Chapter 5, the Sergeant Abraham you meet in the desert is wounded, crippled, and unable to fight or move quickly. You're given the option to kill him early in the level, but doing so results in the desertion of some soldiers and the loss of some supplies. However, he kills himself later on in the chapter anyway, so that part of the narrative can be facilitated. Despite this, he's a definite liability on your team for the time that he's alive, and he even requests that the player kill him outright at the start. This is a less absolute application of the whole kill one to save many problem because the game subverts player agency in this case in order to move the story along, but it's nevertheless an encapsulation of the lose-lose mechanical design of the game as a whole. Players who keep the crippled soldier alive do so out of a sense of compassion, trying to get him to the rendezvous point without realizing the sergeant is too stubborn to try and save his own life. This is another example of the morality system at work, though it's not as valid as the first two options given its subversion. Regardless of this, it's through these kinds of arrangements that the game presents seemingly moral decisions as a function of pragmatic decision-making that arises from the challenge posed by mechanics in the individual chapters. The decisions you make are a function of the information you're given, the aim you're trying to achieve, your beliefs as a player, and nothing more. No evangelizing, no monologues, much. Just the tools in your hand and the problem in front of you. It's through this responsibility that the game achieves a lot of its tension and creates a lot of its fear. Fear is an emotion that a lot of games try to tap, whether it's the animalistic fight or flight of a Telltale Games fight scene or the mounting panic of Pathologic. It's impressive then that Gods Will Be Watching manages to create a sense of fear through uncertainty. The game gives you all the information you could want, but there's one thing it can't give you: future knowledge. It's through fear of consequence that the game creates most of its fear as a whole. Consequences in Gods Will Be Watching are absolute and irrevocable, and failure is permanent as a result. To the irritation of much of the player base, mind you, but it's still permanent. This stresses the worth of mechanical decisions as well. You take decisions much more seriously when they're final than if they were reversible. It's through this association that tension is derived from mechanics. The game is designed around making the player think. During an interview for BioShock Infinite, Ken Levine stated that he was much more interested in what was going on in the player's head rather than the choices they made. I can't say much about BioShock that hasn't already been said, but in Gods Will Be Watching, the game not only makes you think about what you're thinking about, but many other things as well. In this case, both are equally relevant and equally final because of the straight-up toughness of most of the scenarios. Take the torture sequence, for example. The torture sequence makes the player manage a few key resources: the health of Jack and Burden, respectively, the amount of information you give to your captors, and the chance of a successful lie. The first few days are simple so you can get a handle on the nuances of the level. Successfully begging for mercy, divulging information, and lying will all restore health, and different torture methods deal different amounts of damage. There is a point in this level where things are turned on their head: the Russian roulette sequence. I know I criticized this heavily when I was talking about it before, and people on Steam have certainly taken their knives to it as well, but within the context of the level it actually makes sense. For the first few days you've been cheesing your captors by padding out your responses and begging and lying where you needed to. Now it's all up in the air. If you provoke them, you may lose. If you think, you may lose. If you lie, you still may lose. If you confess, you get that much closer to losing, and the chances of losing go up with every blank chamber you encounter. This is easily the most effective way of inducing instantaneous and implied fear. You know you're screwed because you can't game the system, seeing as it's entirely randomized, and you have no idea what the best course of action is, given that almost every action runs the risk of failure. It's a shame that it induces frustration rather than anything else given the context, but from a mechanical perspective it works really, really well. Like I said before though, it's kind of representative of the game's problem where it makes good decisions at the worst possible time. I also said this of Chapter 5, and my points about that chapter still stand. Randomly generating every zone in the level quickly makes things ridiculous to the point of frustration, but it does show how the game creates fear rather effectively. The game even reinforces this within the level by giving you a deadline. It's not a discrete failure condition, but it does add to the tension. Because every tile is unknown, then you need to play it smart when moving, sleeping, scavenging, and dealing with sandstorms. It's easy to lose this level with careless play, and even with careful play, it's testing. If they found a way to deal with this in the initial release, then maybe they might have had a larger player retention towards the end of the game. Regardless of that, there's always tension on every side, from resource to time management and the fear of walking into the unknown. And it's to the game's credit that it uses this unknown to develop fear quite aptly. It's just a shame that every other decision that went into the making of this level was more or less a step backward when in fact you were supposed to be taking steps forward. There are other things that the game does well in addition to these things: characterization, mood development, genuinely tricky puzzles, and some really interesting challenges along the way. It's a shame that they were mired in random variables and questionable design decisions to the point that the developer needed to introduce new difficulty suites, but this isn't the point of this discussion. The point of this video was to talk about some of the unique, good things that this game did in spite of some of its more questionable decisions. By talking about these things and analyzing them critically within the context of the game and its mechanics, I think we can iterate on these successes and failures so that subsequent games by this studio and others can do more interesting and expressive things. To discard this game because of some poor ideas is to throw the lessons out with the book. We need to analyze things critically if anything can be moved forward or improved, otherwise games stay stagnant and they stop making decisions. And if there's anything that this game's taught me, it's that you have to keep making decisions and making proper choices in order to keep moving forward. So that's the video. It wasn't particularly broad because it wasn't supposed to be. I wanted to talk about a couple of things the game did well, and I think I did that nicely. If you have anything to add to this, or you just want to express your irritation at anything that I said, feel free to leave a comment below or hit the like or dislike button as you please. Thanks once again for watching, and I hope you enjoy what you heard. Have a good day. See you next time.